What's up, everybody? Good day to you from Carpo. Well, I said I would upload a part 2 to my hallucinations video, so I gotta at least fulfill this end of it. Don't know how long this one will be, but there's not a lot I can say to add to the previous video about hallucinations. But I concluded my book. When I made the video yesterday, I was about 120 pages in, and I just finished it. It's like 500 pages, 450 pages. It's large type, so, it's not like tiny or anything. But this is the first book that I've read in a long time where I actually was immersed in it. Where I woke up first thing in the morning this morning and read for like 3 hours to finish the book. And it's the Hallucinations by Oliver Sacks. And I went through it very carefully and took notes. I learned a lot more about the systems of the mind, the occipital lobes, and how they can affect how we perceive faces, and which conditions in the brain cause people to hallucinate faces, whereas others hallucinate patterns. Some hallucinate phantom limbs, and it goes all the way down to ghosts, UFOs, and abductions, aliens. Everything you can possibly imagine has been hallucinated. While there are certain experiences that may be real, and there are certain experiences that are shared, there have also been mass hysterias, mass delusions, which have overtaken entire villages in the past, and it's well documented. Sometimes they believed it may have been caused by ergot poisoning, which is it's an alkaloid and it's used to manufacture LSD, has similar effects. And if you're eating tainted wheat, then that can cause a mass delusion. But also, there have been cases of people who have claimed to see things, and then all of a sudden it becomes contagious in the area that they're in, and everyone starts to see it. Things like the Mothman could very well be a mass shared delusion, or not. It could possibly be something else. I definitely am not trying to dispel or break any hearts, or dispel any beliefs in a mystical realm. And the reason why I'm seeking in to learn the scientific reason for certain hallucinations is the same reason that I learn anything else. So I can sort out all the things that aren't true or that aren't relevant, and try to separate the things that are manufactured by our mind with any actual external information that we may be receiving. Because if we can document even a couple cases of actual information received, such as a psychic connection, or let's say an out-of-body experience that's actually provable, in the sense there have been several stories of people seeing things during an out-of-body experience that they shouldn't have known because they were in a hospital room. However, they were knocked out, and they shouldn't have known that, and they can name the nurses that were in the room and everything. But there are also cases of people who just claim to have floated above their bodies. There are several types of hallucinations which cause you to, there's a name for it, but it's palinoma or something, where you believe you have another you with you. And there are a lot of people that live with this regularly. Sometimes the person does what they're doing, and it's just a reflection of them. Other times, it's a completely separate entity. One guy said he would always see himself out mowing the lawn or doing something. He believed it was his guilty conscience telling him what he should be doing. But many of the people who live with these hallucinations live with them for their entire lives and are completely aware that they're hallucinating all the time. And they're afraid to tell anybody because they don't want to be considered crazy. And when I got into the next chapter, after the last video, it went into migraines. And migraines and epilepsy are very similar in some regards in the hallucinations that are seen. Before an epileptic fit, often they will get a bright light that will invade their vision. Some people see it as like a striped zigzaggy line. Others have seen completely different things, like geometrical shapes. And then there's an era of silence right before the headache kicks in. The migraine part of it is like a secondary after the hallucination. It's like your mind is preparing for it. And the same thing with epilepsy. Some people they've actually tried, several people have tried to create epileptic fits. They actually enjoy it because they know right before the seizure there's this moment of calm where sometimes they say time lasts forever. It's almost like God has descended. It's like the most compelling, amazing feeling that people have ever had. And in the deep roots of our mind, we have a yearning to believe in something greater. So therefore, a hallucination may very well give us that comfort that we need, such as in times of dying or otherwise. Well, there are so many theories out there, people saying, well, when you die, DMT is released into your system, and that's the chemical that allows your soul to move to the next dimension, or that all the different beliefs like this that aren't quite proven true. Like DMT may very well be released. We know that the body produces it, but we don't know exactly what it's used for, or if it has anything to do with anything spiritual whatsoever. And I guess what I'm prying at is there any significant otherworldly dimension or reality that we can actually touch and understand, rather than just give anecdotal evidence? And that's what we have, is a lot of anecdotal evidence. There are millions of people out there who will tell you stories about the ghosts that they saw, or the little people they saw running around their room, and many of these people are very convinced that these things are real. You know, it goes back to sleep paralysis. Anybody who's ever studied that knows it's the reason the word nightmare is used to denote a bad dream these days. But the original context of nightmare was a nightmare. The word mare was the old hag, and also known as the witch or the old lady. There's several different names she's given. Was it succubus, I think, is the one. This is the feeling that someone is sitting on your chest or your back when you're laying in bed, and you can't move, you're completely paralyzed, and they're sucking the breath out of you, metaphorically or literally. And this is a well-known and well-documented experience that crosses boundaries. And people seem to have this during times of intense stress, or during times when they may have had a lack of sleep, or consuming certain substances. Now they say sometimes this will happen to people. There's hypnagogia and hypnopompia. Hypnagogia is when you are just going to sleep and you're on the threshold and you start to have kind of hallucinations or dreams. Hypnopompia, they say, occurs upon waking, but it can actually occur before sleeping too. Hypnopompia is when you're actually seeing things in the room with you, yet you're fully coherent, or at least you think you are. And these are full-blown hallucinations of people, places, things, ideas, that you're otherwise coherent. And it can be very scary for people who have it. But hypnopompia is also basically what is happening during sleep paralysis. A person wakes up and they may be in a waking state, but they can't move. And they feel like they're being pinned down, or someone's watching them, someone's laying by them. There's all kinds of stories. There have been stories of people thinking that somebody put a dead leg in the bed with them and kicked their own leg out of bed and would not recognize it as their own. And this is the opposite of phantom limb syndrome, which is another hallucination, where people are actually able to use their hands in their mind, and they can still feel all the nerves in a lost limb and can't explain it otherwise. The brain is compensating. We're fooling ourselves if we try to say every hallucination is real, and that's why it's important to pick these out. But the experience of sleep paralysis is very close to an alien abduction scenario, and the DMT experience as well, or an out-of-body experience. And they all seem to be tied to separate parts of the brain. And since so many hallucinations and hallucinatory situations can be explained by either an accident, a brain surgery, or brain damage, then we can start to see that certain conditions can create this, can allow the mind to start to process things incorrectly. Whereas we can also induce that by taking psychedelics. That puts us into a temporary psychosis, if you will. And it is a matter of whether you hear voices, see patterns and symbols, and you think that those are something really important that's being taught to you. Or if you can decipher whether or not they're just parts of your subconscious, or perhaps genetic information that's been passed down through generations. Now, much of the art in history has been inspired by, people would say, drugs, but honestly, a lot of people, these people who created great masterpieces, they had all kinds of other conditions. Some of them never touched any drugs. They were created by either a fever as a child, which can create massive hallucinations. Everyone's heard about the fever, the feeling of blowing up like a balloon. Hell, it's in a Pink Floyd song. These are very common and they cross all borders. Certain conditions create these certain types of hallucinations, and some of the people's epilepsy has caused them to have this major spiritual significant breakthroughs. Many of these people become religious leaders. Many people have run for Congress, for president, or else otherwise in various countries because they had a hallucinated voice tell them they should do this, and they believe it to be the word of God, or perhaps a guardian angel, or whatever it may be. So, as one lady described it, she said, once she realized that her hallucinations were caused by the accident or whatever she had wrong with her, because she was a scientific-minded lady and she had become very spiritual. And she said her heart was broken. She said she felt like she had left behind the mystical a little bit, and it kind of bummed her out. And I was waiting to hear at least one story like that, because that's how I feel when I study certain things. The more you know, the more you pick apart your beliefs. But it's really important that we do this, because it's just easy to say, well, everyone's experience is real. So-and-so saw aliens, and so-and-so is a psychic. But there have even been a lot of studies to show that people who, let's say, channelers, okay? Now, I'm not going to negate all channelers or say that they're all lying, because obviously a lot of them believe that they're really channeling alien entities. So let's just take this for a minute and say, if the person believes they're channeling entities and the people receiving the information believe that they are truly getting this information from these aliens, then it creates a kind of a all-in-one dual hallucinatory state where everyone's contributing and partaking in the hallucination. I've listened to several people that have claimed to be channelers and psychics, and I've wanted to believe. I've really wanted to hear something that was undisputable, something that completely blows my mind, but none of it resonated. None of it made sense. There have been little stories I've heard of so-and-so, a psychic, told somebody about something that they couldn't have known. But even with all the individual stories, there's too much of the unknown. I mean, you can talk about, non-local or quantum entanglement. Maybe our brains are somehow entangled. Maybe there is a psychic connection between all people and we can read little parts of it. But trying to say that we're actually transferring information from a completely separate entity in another realm, that's a little more difficult. And there are guys like, I can't even remember his name right now. He's pretty well known. He goes into this supposed state where he's transferring information from an alien, and he has this weird voice. Really nice guy. He might even believe what he's saying, but I've listened to several of his lectures, and all I can hear is the same things repeated that we already know. It's almost like our subconscious telling us, humans are destroying the earth, humans are doing this. So anyway, many of these channelers or psychics, I believe, they're detaching themselves from their subconscious and speaking from their subconscious as if it's another person. Now, of course, there's nothing worse than a skeptic, when it comes to a person who's skeptical about everything, who says there is nothing out there, there's nothing beyond our minds, we're just products of a material universe. That's not me. I really want to know the answers, but I also want to be honest with myself, and that means sorting through all the details. And so this book is a phenomenal way to sort through many of the details and pull together many of the aspects of it, and to realize that all of us are capable of having hallucinations in our waking life, in completely sober states of mind, from various conditions. It can be brought on by stress or a sickness. Sometimes, I've only had sleep paralysis, or what they call hypnopompia, one time, and that was when I had severe back pain. I didn't have anything for the pain. I asked a friend if he had anything, and he gave me a Subutex, or maybe it was a Suboxone, one or the other. And it's an opioid agonist blocker. I can't remember which one it was, because there's Subutex and Suboxone. Doesn't matter. Basically, I took an opioid, and a very small amount, relatively. And then I was sitting in the chair at my campsite, because we went camping, and I was looking at the trees, and all of a sudden the picture started filling with other beings. And I was completely awake and aware, but I couldn't move, and I was dreaming while awake. And that was I think it was the only time I've really had that. But I could see how a person could be scared to death if they didn't know what was happening. So, being aware of it allows you to analyze it in depth. Because it wasn't too long after that, I was camping with one of my wife's nephew, and he has sleep paralysis sometimes, and we were able to talk about it. And I think a lot of people that have these things don't want to talk about it because they're embarrassed. Some people don't want to be labeled as crazy, so they don't even mention hallucinations, whereas others, they take their hallucinations as complete fact. They believe that they're divinely inspired, and I think that can get us in trouble if we're not being honest with ourselves. But to each his own. Honestly, we all seek a mystical revelation or truth in life. I've had experiences that can never make me think otherwise. In other words, some people have had moments of clarity that are so much more real than real life. And this does happen. It's happened to me, and it's happened to several people. It can be during a psychedelic experience, or it could just be during just a moment, what they'd call a satori in Buddhism, or an awakening, which happens quickly. It's all of a sudden everything looks different, and you hit this realization. And we could call it an epiphany in the West, but it's much more than an epiphany. It's a realization that there is a state of mind that's more clear than this one. And sometimes in those transcendental, hypnagogic, or psychedelic, or hallucinatory states, they seem more real than reality, and they can change a person for life. So what it comes down to is it something useful that you can do something with and that gives you comfort? And that's fine. Because if you want to shut down and take it that far and say, okay, I believe in this now, then that works for you as an individual. But I got to dig through the details to make sure that my own delusions aren't overwhelming me, because, I'd love to believe in everything. I've been through my alien phase. I went through my conspiracy phase. I went through every bit of obscure occult type information that I could get my hands on, and eventually I set it all down and said, which ones can I do something with? And the only ones that were left were basically personal, motivational things like learning about what's true in my own life in order to make it better. So I don't know. So that's my second part on hallucinations. So have a wonderful day, everybody. I'll talk to you.